I need to find a tuxedo I'd left at my best man's place 3 days before the wedding. And that's the only reason I ended up at his apartment that Tuesday night. My best man and I had been friends since we were 11 years old. We grew up on the same street in Mississauga, played hockey together every winter on the outdoor rink behind St. Timothy's School, got our first jobs at the same Home Depot, Fiancée. The summer after grade 10, when I proposed to my fiancée 2 years ago, I didn't even have to think about who I was going to ask to stand beside me. It was him, it was always going to be him. The weds was Saturday. This was Tuesday. I dropped my suit bag at his place the week before, when we went to pick it up from the tailor together. And in all the chaos of the final days. The seating chart drama with my mother, the florist calling twice about centerpieces, the rehearsal dinner venue sending the wrong invoice. I'd completely forgotten it was still there. My fiancé called me around 9 that night, reminding me I needed it for the rehearsal Thursday, so I texted him, no answer. Tried calling, nothing. He lived 12 minutes from me. I figured I'd just swing by, grab it from his doorstep if he'd left it out, and be back home before 10. He hadn't left it out, but his lights were on. I knocked, no answer. Knocked again. I could hear music inside, something low, the kind you put on when you're not alone and you want the ambient noise. I almost left. I genuinely almost just turned around and texted him to drop it off in the morning. But then I thought about Thursday, about needing the suit, about the tailor's adjustments that had taken 3 weeks, and I knocked one more time, harder. The door opened and it wasn't him standing there. It was my fiancée. She was wearing his shirt. I remember the exact sound my brain made in that moment. Not a thought, not words, just a kind of white noise, like when a television loses signal. She said my name. She said it like a question, like she was as surprised to see me as I was to see her. Which was impossible, because I was the one whose world had just inverted. I said nothing. I couldn't. My best man appeared behind her a second later, hair disheveled, and the look on his face, not shock, not horror, but this slow, awful deflation. Like a man who has just watched something he knew was coming finally arrive. Told me everything I needed to understand. This was not the first time. I picked up my suit bag from just inside the door. He had actually leaned it against the wall right there in the entryway. I picked it up, walked back to my car, drove home, and sat in my driveway for 45 minutes without going inside. What do you do with the knowledge that the two people you trusted most in the world have been lying to your face? I kept thinking about specific moments. Saturday afternoon barbecue at my parents' place in Burlington last August, where the two of them had been laughing at something on his phone. And I'd walked over and they'd shown me a meme and I'd thought nothing of it. A weekend she said she was at her sister's in Hamilton, and he'd been at a buddy's cabin. Little things. The kind of things that only become sinister once you already know the answer. I went inside eventually. I sat at the kitchen table. She texted me 11 times between 10:15 and midnight. He called twice. I read every text and answered none of them. Around 1 in the morning she stopped. Around 1:30, my phone lit up with a text from him that just said, "I'm sorry, this isn't what you think." I stared at that sentence for a long time. I still don't know what he thought it was, if not exactly what it looked like. I called my older sister the next morning. She was the only person I told, and she was good about it. Didn't explode, didn't tell me what to do. Just listened and then said quietly, "What do you need?" I told her I needed to cancel a wedding. She said she'd help. Here's what canceling a wedding 4 days out looks like. It's calling a venue coordinator at 7:30 in the morning. And listening to her walk you through a contract clause about refunds for cancellations. Fewer than 30 days in advance. It's losing the deposit on the catering, $4,000, non-refundable. It's the flowers, the photographer, the hotel block you'd set up for the out-of-town guests. It adds up faster than you think. I'd had wedding insurance, thankfully. A detail my sister had pushed me on months earlier. And it covered a portion of it, but not everything. The financial damage of that morning was real, and it was immediate, and it sat on top of everything else like a second weight. I called the venue first. Then the caterer. Then the photographer, who was actually the most gracious of all of them, and told me she was sorry, genuinely, and waived her cancellation fee entirely. I will never forget that woman. By noon, I had sent a message to both sets of parents, to the wedding party, and to the invited guests. I kept it simple. I said the wedding was canceled, I thanked everyone for their support, and I said I was not in a position to answer questions. I did not explain. I did not name anyone. I just stopped the machine. My fiancé's mother called me within 20 minutes of that message going out. I let it go to voicemail. Her father called next. Then my own mother, who had not been in the loop and called in a panic, asking what was going on, whether someone had died. I called her back and told her the short version. She was silent for a very long time and then she said, "Oh sweetheart, that was all, it was enough." Then things took a turn I wasn't prepared for. My fiancé's family, once they understood what had happened, seemed primarily concerned with damage control, rather than accountability. Her mother called again that evening. and left a voicemail I wish I hadn't listened to. She said she understood I was upset. She said things happen between people that are complicated. She said she hoped I would take some time before I made any permanent decisions. Permanent decisions. As though I had been the one to create the situation. As though walking away from a betrayal was the impulsive choice. My best man's parents, who I had known since I was 11 years old, who had fed me dinner at their kitchen table more times than I could count, said nothing to me directly. His father sent a brief text saying they were very sorry for the pain this had caused. That was it, but the part that gutted me more than any of that was my own father. My father called me 3 days after I canceled the wedding. By that point I had already arranged to take a leave from work. I was a project coordinator at a civil engineering firm in Oakville, and my manager was understanding. And I was in the process of figuring out what came next. My father's call started normally. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was managing, and then he said something I have thought about almost every day since. He said he thought I should consider whether I was being too hasty. I asked him what he meant. He said that people make mistakes, that my best man was like a second son to him, that my fiancée was a good person, who had clearly made a terrible error in judgment, and that throwing away a life together over one mistake seemed like a reaction I might regret. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear and I remember the feeling very clearly. Not anger, exactly. More like a door closing. A quiet definitive click. I told my father that I appreciated the call, that I loved him, and that I would be in touch. I hung up. I sat there for a long time. Looking back, I think that was the moment I truly understood that I was alone in this. Not temporarily, not because I hadn't explained myself well enough. Genuinely alone. The people who were supposed to have my back had weighed the situation and decided, quietly, that the relationships they had with the people who hurt me mattered more than the fact that I had been hurt. My best man's family didn't want to lose their son's relationship with my family. My fiancé's family didn't want a scandal. My own father didn't want to lose what he'd built with a man he'd thought of as a second son for 15 years. And me? I was apparently the variable they were willing to adjust. I found a subletter for my apartment. I had a one-bedroom near the lakeshore in Port Credit. Gave myself 2 weeks to pack what I needed and moved to Calgary. I had a university friend there, someone completely outside of all of this, who helped me find a short-term rental and connected me with a firm looking for project coordinators. I had my certifications. Within 6 weeks of arriving, I had a job offer. I took it. I won't pretend the first year was easy, because it wasn't. There's a specific kind of grief that comes from losing multiple relationships simultaneously. Not just the woman you were going to marry, not just your closest friend, but the version of the future you had mapped out for yourself in such specific detail that you can still see it when you close your eyes. I knew what our kitchen was going to look like. I knew where we were going to spend Christmas. That's the thing no one tells you about this kind of loss. You're not just grieving a person, you're grieving an entire architecture. But Calgary was good to me. The work was steady and interesting. I was on a municipal infrastructure project for most of my first year, the kind of work that requires enough problem solving to keep your mind occupied. I joined a recreational hockey league that fall. Made friends slowly, the way adults do, through proximity and repeated exposure, not the instant bond of childhood. I went to therapy for 14 months with a therapist in Kensington who had a calm, no-nonsense approach that suited me. I did not date seriously for a long time. I blocked my best man's number about 3 weeks after leaving Mississauga. I blocked my fiancée a little later. Not out of anger, by that point. More out of necessity. The way you sometimes have to remove something from your line of sight before you can stop looking at it. I kept my father's number, but our calls became sparse and brief. He never brought up the subject again. I think he knew he'd miscalculated. He just never said so out loud. By the end of the second year I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Genuinely okay. Not healed exactly. Not like it hadn't happened, but functional in a way that went beyond just getting through the day. I had built something real in Calgary. A job I respected, a small group of people I trusted. A life that was quiet but mine. I started dating again, carefully, and met someone the following spring who was patient and funny, and did not remind me at all of the person I had left behind, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I stopped expecting contact from the people I'd left. I didn't want it. I had made my peace with the idea that some chapters end badly, and that the only thing you can do is write the next one better. Then, about 4.5 years after I drove away from that apartment in Mississauga, with my suit bag in the back seat, my phone rang with a number I didn't immediately recognize. I almost let it go. Something made me answer. It was my father, not unusual on its own, but his voice was different, thinner somehow. He said he'd been trying to reach me. I'd changed my number about a year after moving. A practical decision that has the side effect of making it harder to be found, and that he'd gotten this number through his sister. He said he was sorry to call out of the blue. He said he needed to talk to me about something. He told me my best man's father, a man I had grown up seeing at family dinners, who had taught us both how to change a tire in his driveway when we were 15, had passed away suddenly from a heart attack 6 weeks prior. He told me my best man had taken it hard. He told me that in the fallout of the last few years, things had not gone particularly well for the people I'd left behind. My ex-fiancée and my best man had moved in together, that I'd heard through the grapevine early on, but what I hadn't known was that it had fallen apart within 18 months. Quietly and badly. He had apparently struggled for a while after that. Work instability. Some period of difficulty I didn't need the details of. And now his father was gone, and my father was calling me to ask if I might consider reaching out. I listened to all of this without speaking. When my father finished, there was a long silence. Then he said something I had been waiting, without knowing it, to hear for almost 5 years. He said he was sorry. Not for the news. Not for calling. He said he was sorry for the phone call he'd made in those first days. For telling me I was being hasty, for putting his own comfort ahead of my well-being. He said he'd thought about it many times. He said he didn't have an excuse worth giving. I appreciated it. I want to be clear about that. A genuine apology from a parent, one that isn't dressed up as anything else, that doesn't contain the word but, that doesn't come with a request attached to it, is something. It mattered to me. The request came separately, a few sentences later. He wasn't hiding it, to his credit. He asked if there was any part of me that might be willing to reconnect, even just a letter, even just to acknowledge the loss of a man who had been part of my childhood too. I told my father I needed to think about it. He said he understood. We talked for a few more minutes about ordinary things, his garden, the weather in Burlington, how my sister's kids were doing, normal things. Before we hung up I told him I loved him. I meant it. I have thought about it. Quite a bit, actually. Here is what I keep coming back to. The man who died was someone I genuinely cared about. He taught me things. He showed up at my hockey games. He made bad jokes at the dinner table and laughed at them himself, loudly, before anyone else could. That loss is real, and it's mine too, regardless of what happened with his son. But there's a difference between acknowledging a loss and reopening a door. I'm not sure those are the same thing. I find that grief requires me to give back what I reclaimed. I have a life now that I built myself, from nothing. In a city where nobody knew my name when I arrived. My partner doesn't know the man who drove away from that apartment. She knows the one who showed up in Calgary, who had done the work, who had figured out what he actually wanted from the people around him. I like the person I became on the other side of all of this. I'm not interested in anything that puts that at risk. So when people ask me whether I'll reach out, and my father has asked twice more since that first call, gently, without pressure, I tell them the same thing I told him the first time. I'm still thinking about it. What I know for certain is this. The distance I put between myself and that chapter of my life was not a punishment. It was not spite. It was the only way I could figure out how to stop drowning. Some people understand that. Some people need you to stay close enough for them to feel okay about what they did, and they call that forgiveness, and they can't tell the difference. The suit, by the way. I wore it to a colleague's wedding in Calgary 2 years ago. It fit perfectly. The tailor did good work.